What does it mean to be a good person? Is it how you think you should act or how others think you should? Today I'll be sharing my thoughts about the short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. I'll be explaining how O'Connor vaguely answers these questions in a sort of eerie way and how the story shows what it means to be a really good person. This is an intriguing yet disturbing short story that takes place in the 20th century. The story starts off with a family, the grandmother, her son Bailey, his wife, their two kids, and then their baby, and they all decide to take a road trip down to Florida. The grandmother really doesn't want to go. She wants to go to Tennessee instead. Because she doesn't want to go, she brings up an excuse, this escaped killer called the Misfit, to try and repel them from going to Florida, but she wants to go to Tennessee instead, but no one listens. During the ride, the grandmother convinces the children to beg and see an old house that she claims to remember, and she claims to have like a secret treasure, but she was actually making it all up. So they turn around and drive down a dirt road towards that so-called house that the grandma was talking about, and they crash their car. And then so while waiting for help, they see a car and wave for it. But once the car stops that they waved for, it was actually a misfit that the grandmother was originally talking about and his men. The men take the family into the woods one by one, where they can hear gunshots, only to assume that their family is being killed one by one. And then at the end, the grandmother is the only one left talking to the misfit. She's pleading for her life. She tries everything to stay alive, especially talking about Jesus, saying he's actually a good man, even though she knows, who he is. So she tries to reach out and touch him while talking to him, like his shoulder, and he shoots her on the spot. So the story obviously took a dark turn when you least expected it. It shows that true honesty and kindness doesn't come by just acting nice or, reciting religion, talking about Jesus, but rather being under some pressure, like some kind of pressure as the grandma was. And we only saw this at the end when the grandmother had no other choice. One of the themes in the story was the fake goodness that came from the grandmother. She claimed that she was dressing fancy for the road, quote, in case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once that she was a lady, unquote, which was pretty ironic considering at the end she actually she was laying dead on the side of the road. And then another thing that was ironic was how she was trying to use the excuse that this misfit murderer was on the loose to go to Tennessee instead, but she actually did end up crossing paths with him. She lies about a treasure in the house to manipulate the kids for amusement. Importantly, she actually hides her cat in her basket at the beginning when she was actually told not to bring it by her family. And the cat jumping out of the basket was actually what caused the crash. And this is a great example of symbolism and carelessness by the grandmother and how she refused to listen to anyone besides herself. When the misfit actually shows up, initially she calls him a good man, even though, she knows who he is, just to save herself. That was the grandmother. When the misfit at the end states, quote, she would have been a good woman if there had been somebody to shoot her every minute of her life, end quote. O'Connor meant it that she'd only act selfless when she didn't have any other option. That she was not truly kind, just acting polite, right? Another point that appeared towards the end is grace from violence. O'Connor showed that true grace can come from violence when one is put in a situation like the grandmother, and how she was at the end. Really, she really cared. The grandmother, as a last resort, says to the misfit, quote, you're one of my own children, unquote. This is the first time in the story we see the grandmother in complete vulnerability and compassion, and that was completely different to what we saw prior in the story. So the end of the story was she actually became a good person. She cared about it. She cared about him. I think O'Connor, the author, used that to show how real change doesn't come, easy. And then a huge part of the story happened, when they actually crossed paths with the Misfit and his guys. When they saw him coming over the hill and waved, they saw him driving down and they tried to stop him, but they didn't know who they were stopping. From the beginning, the Misfit is portrayed as scary, especially because him and all of his men that came out with him had guns, but he isn't portrayed as stupid. He has questionable but understandable beliefs, and he debates the grandmother about her religion and morality. And then morality was a huge theme in the story. The Misfit quote, Jesus was the only one that ever raised the dead, and he shouldn't have done it. He thrown everything off balance, end quote. I don't think he really believes in Jesus. He wants to believe in it, but he can't. The Misfit, he can't be sure that Jesus did what he said he did. So if he doesn't have proof that it's true, then why even try to be good or moral at all? To him, if there's no proof of a higher power, does anything, we do matter at all? So his mindset is scary, the way he thinks is dark, but he raises good questions. He's not just scary, he's philosophical. He's the only character in the story that seriously thinks about good and evil, who really thinks about like his choices. His dialogue makes him probably the most self-aware character in the story because he knows what he's doing and he admits it. He doesn't deny that murder is wrong, but from his point of view, there's no reason not to do it. His mind is so blank, he doesn't have any emotion, so there's no reason not to kill someone from his point of view. It's scary because he thinks about morality more than the grandmother does until, the ending. When I first read the story, I looked past the grandmother's ignorance and hypocrisy, because of the things she says, but it's a representation of how people act differently when they're being judged or watched. Makes me think that would me or any people in my life become genuinely more, compassionate if our lives were on the line? And does this mean that we only see others actually equal to ourselves when we're desperate or under pressure again? And then another question that arises because of that is, how do people today act in a way that makes them look good when they really aren't? And one of the really good examples today is social media, because you can make yourself look way better than you are. Only include the good qualities, and especially you can hide the bad qualities about yourself. Anything, you can be whoever you want, right? And this has probably changed, since social media started. Before social media, this probably wasn't even a thing, right? So more fakeness has probably arisen since the creation of social media. So then some more questions. Do people only act good when there's pressure? Like when there's a really real reason to be good? Is that the only time they can be like a good person? If there was a camera following you around like all the time, would you act differently? That's a really good question to ask yourself at any moment. Personally, I think we confuse politeness and morality. Little things like holding the door open for someone or saying bless you when someone sneezes. Those are polite, but is that what makes you a good person? Is there a line that can be drawn where a person's politeness ends and goodness starts? Just like the grandmother saying the right things and being polite throughout the story, but she lacked the empathy and honesty for others. So, from the short story overall, O'Connor raises the question, what does it mean to be a good man or woman? The author makes it clear that being nice and being good aren't the same things, and sometimes it's extreme pressure that reveals who we really are. your true intentions. We see that goodness isn't just what you say, but it's your actions under pressure that count. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.